There was a young girl named Maya who lived in a small, peaceful town. Maya was special in many ways, but one thing that set her apart was that she was deaf. From a very young age, she learned to live in a world filled with sounds she couldn't hear. While most kids could hear the laughter of their friends or the sounds of cars passing by, Maya couldn't. Instead, she relied on her eyes, her other senses, and the strength of her heart to guide her through life. Maya was a bright girl, full of energy and curiosity. Even though she couldn't hear, she loved learning about the world around her. She was just like other kids her age. She liked to run, play, and laugh, but sometimes things felt a bit different. At school, she faced challenges because not everyone understood what it was like to be deaf. She had to work harder to communicate, to express her thoughts and feelings. Sometimes she felt frustrated when others couldn't understand her or when she couldn't hear the sounds around her. But Maya never let that stop her. Her family was very supportive. Maya's mother, especially, was her biggest cheerleader. She always encouraged her to be independent and brave. She taught Maya how to communicate using her hands, helping her to learn sign language so she could share her thoughts with others. This made things a little easier, but still, there were moments when Maya felt alone. She had to rely on her eyes more than anyone else, watching closely to understand what was happening in the world around her. One of Maya's favorite things to do was to go on walks. She loved the feeling of fresh air against her face and the sights of nature all around her. Maya often went for these walks by herself, even though her mother would remind her to be careful. Maya didn't mind. She felt strong and independent, and the quiet of the world made her feel at peace. On one sunny afternoon, she decided to take one of her usual walks through the park. She loved the park because it had wide paths and plenty of space to explore. She would walk there for hours, letting her mind wander, not realizing how far she had gone. That day, something felt different. Maya noticed that she had wandered further than usual. The streets around the park were quiet, and the people she usually saw seemed to be gone. She looked around, and the familiar surroundings began to look strange. A sense of unease crept into her chest. She wasn't scared, but she felt lost, and there was no one nearby to help. She hadn't seen anyone for a while, and her phone was at home, charging. Maya felt the weight of her situation. She had never been this far from home without anyone around. She tried to retrace her steps, but everything looked unfamiliar. The street names didn't make sense, and the tall buildings made the place feel like a maze. Her heart began to beat faster. She was alone. Suddenly, she remembered something her mother had told her in case she ever found herself in trouble. If she ever needed help, she could signal for it using her hands. It was a simple sign, a signal known to people who had been taught how to recognize distress. Maya knew it as the SOS hand signal, a sign used to ask for help in emergencies. Maya stood still, took a deep breath, and raised her hands into the SOS position. She didn't know if anyone would see her, but she hoped someone, anyone, would notice and come to her rescue. Maya stood alone in the quiet park, feeling the weight of her decision. She had made the SOS signal, but there was no way to know if anyone had seen her. The world around her seemed still, like the calm before a storm. She could hear the wind gently rustling the leaves, and the occasional sound of a bird calling in the distance. But those were the only noises. Everything else was silent. Her mind began to race. Was she really lost? Was she in danger? As she stood there, trying to make sense of what to do next, Maya's thoughts kept returning to one question. What if no one saw her? What if no one came? She could feel her heart start to pound in her chest. There was something about the stillness that made her nervous. It was as if the silence was pressing in on her, making everything feel more uncertain. She glanced around, trying to find something familiar. The park seemed larger than usual, and the paths felt like they were twisting in different directions. She had walked these paths countless times before, but today they seemed strange, almost unrecognizable. A sinking feeling grew inside her. She couldn't remember how she had gotten here or how to get back. She wished her phone wasn't left at home. charging. If she had it, she could have called someone for help. Her mind wandered to the people she loved, the ones she could always count on. She thought about her mother, who always knew how to make her feel safe, and her friends at school, who never let her feel alone. But now, they were far away. There was no one around. Her hands dropped from the SOS position, and she wrapped her arms around herself for comfort. She needed to think clearly, but the longer she stood there, the more unsure she felt. That's when she noticed something that made her stomach tighten, a figure moving in the distance. At first, she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. It could have been a shadow or a trick of her mind. But no, it was a person, walking toward her. Her eyes narrowed, trying to make out who it was. The person was older, a man with a weathered face, wearing a cap and an old jacket. He walked with a slow, steady pace, but there was something about his movements that caught her attention. It wasn't the way he walked. It was the way he looked at her. His eyes seemed sharp, focused, as though he was observing every little detail. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who he was, but something about his gaze made her feel uneasy. What was he doing here? Why was he walking toward her? Her mind raced. Should she be worried? Should she try to run? Maya's body tensed, her instincts telling her to be cautious. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, not when she was already feeling so lost and alone. As the man drew closer, she quickly glanced around for a way to escape if needed. But the park was open, and there was nowhere to hide. She was stuck in the middle, with no one else around. The man was getting closer now, and Maya could see that he wasn't rushing or trying to hide anything. He was walking calmly, like he had no hurry. When he was within a few feet of her, he stopped. Maya could feel her heartbeat in her chest, louder than ever. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. This moment could change everything. As Maya stood there, unsure of what would happen next, the man paused just a few feet away from her. She felt her body tense, not knowing what to expect. Would he be kind, or would he make her situation worse? She felt an overwhelming urge to move, but her feet were glued to the ground. Every part of her was on alert, watching the man closely, trying to make sense of his intentions. The man took a moment, studying Maya. His face was lined with age, and there was something about his eyes that spoke of experience, an understanding of the world that only time could bring. He didn't smile, but his gaze was not threatening. Instead, it was filled with curiosity and something else, recognition. Maya's instinct told her he wasn't like the others she had encountered before. There was something different about him. After a few seconds that felt much longer to Maya, the man slowly raised his hand, as though to wave or to signal something. He didn't speak, but his movement was calm and deliberate. Maya's heart fluttered in her chest as she watched his hand approach. She was used to communicating with her hands, but this was different. She was hoping he understood. She couldn't speak to him the way she spoke with her friends or her family. In this moment, she would have to rely on something else, the power of nonverbal communication. The man's hand stopped midair, just a few inches from his side, then moved slowly and deliberately. His fingers formed a shape, no words, no sound, just a quiet motion. Maya's eyes widened as she recognized what he was doing. He was doing the very same hand gesture she had just made earlier, the SOS signal. It was as if he understood, as if he had seen her distress, even though she wasn't sure anyone had noticed. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? Did he really understand what she was trying to say? The shock of it left her momentarily speechless, but soon she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had signaled for help, and here was someone who recognized it, someone who cared enough to respond. The veteran, for that's what Maya now understood him to be, didn't rush toward her. He wasn't in a hurry, and he didn't make any sudden movements. His actions were careful, measured. It was as if he was giving her space, letting her know that she could trust him. Maya could feel a strange calm settling over her as the tension in her body began to ease. It wasn't the kind of relief that came from knowing everything would be okay right away, but it was enough to let her breathe again. She realized that the man wasn't looking at her in fear or confusion. Instead, he seemed to see her for who she was, just a girl trying to ask for help. A sense of connection formed between them, even without words. He was showing her that he understood and that he would help. Maya still wasn't sure how she felt about the situation, but she knew one thing. This man, the veteran, wasn't a threat. He was someone who had seen the world in a way that few others could understand. And somehow, Maya knew that he was the one who could help her find her way out of this strange and unfamiliar place. For a moment, Maya stood there, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. She wasn't used to strangers approaching her, especially not in such a strange place. But this man, the veteran, had seen her SOS signal and responded with his own hand gesture. She didn't need words to understand what he meant. He was asking if she needed help. Maya's heart raced. She wanted to say something, to express her gratitude, but she knew she couldn't. The words wouldn't come out in the way she hoped. Instead, she felt the strength of her emotions building up inside her. This was her chance. This was someone who could help her get out of the situation. She could feel her nerves calm a little as she met his eyes. The veteran seemed to notice her hesitation, and rather than pressuring her, he simply gave a small, reassuring nod. He didn't seem impatient or upset that she wasn't speaking. His calm presence was exactly what Maya needed. He wasn't judging her, and he wasn't rushing her. Instead, he just waited, his eyes never leaving hers. She took a deep breath. There was something in the way he moved, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel safe. It wasn't like the people who sometimes stared at her, unsure of what to do because they didn't understand her. This man had an unspoken wisdom about him, an understanding that made her feel like she wasn't alone. Slowly, Maya lifted her hands again, this time a little more confidently, and signed a few words she had learned over the years. She signed, "I'm lost. I don't know where I am." She hoped he understood, even though she wasn't sure if he knew sign language. The veteran's eyes softened as he watched her. For a second, there was silence between them, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant birds chirping. Then he slowly shook his head, as though he was processing what she had communicated. He wasn't shocked or confused, like others might have been. Instead, there was a quiet recognition in his gaze, as if he had encountered situations like this before. His expression remained calm, but his next action confirmed something important. He understood her. He signed back to her, slowly, carefully. "It's okay. You're safe now." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped for help, but she hadn't expected it to come like this. The words she had seen in her mother's face when she was comforted after a difficult moment, the warmth in the actions of those who had shown her kindness, now seemed to be present in the veteran. It was as if, without a single spoken word, he had conveyed exactly what she needed to hear. A small smile tugged at the corners of Maya's mouth. She hadn't realized how much she needed reassurance until now. In that moment, she felt a wave of relief, one she hadn't expected. She wasn't just another person lost in the world. She was seen. She was understood. The veteran wasn't treating her like a problem to be solved. He was treating her like someone who mattered, just as she was. And that simple understanding made all the difference. Maya nodded in response, feeling a strange sense of trust growing between them. The veteran hadn't spoken much, but everything he had done and the way he had responded made her feel like she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't just a lost girl in a strange place. She was a person with a story, with hopes and fears, and now she had someone who would help her find her way home. With a shared understanding now between them, Maya felt a sense of relief she hadn't realized she needed. The tension in her body began to ease, though her mind was still swirling with thoughts. What was going to happen next? Was she really safe now? Could this man, this veteran, truly help her find her way back home? The veteran didn't waste any time. He took a small step back, giving Maya enough space to feel comfortable, but he still kept his eyes on her. He didn't speak, but his body language told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to leave her side, and he wasn't going to let her feel lost again. He was here to help, and that was enough for Maya. Maya felt a wave of gratitude, but also a sense of uncertainty. It was one thing to have someone acknowledge her distress, but it was another thing entirely to trust them to guide her out of this unfamiliar place. She had spent so many years learning to navigate the world on her own, to rely on herself, and now, for the first time, she was being asked to trust a stranger. It wasn't easy, but something about the veteran made it easier. There was no rush in his movements, no sign of impatience. He didn't seem like he was trying to fix everything right away. Instead, he seemed content to walk at her pace, to give her time to adjust, to make sure she was comfortable with what was happening. The veteran then made another gesture, signaling for Maya to walk with him. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. His hand motion was open, relaxed, and welcoming. It was as if he was saying, "Come with me, and I'll help you." Maya hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but the feeling of safety she had started to feel made her take a small step forward. As she moved toward him, the veteran started to walk, his steps slow and steady. Maya matched his pace, walking alongside him, unsure of what to say or do. The two of them walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. Maya didn't mind the quiet. It felt peaceful in a way she hadn't expected. There was no need for words between them. The silence was comforting, not awkward. After a few moments, the veteran glanced over at her, his eyes thoughtful but kind. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. He began to write something down, his handwriting neat and clear. Maya watched him, curious. When he finished, he held the notepad out to her. She took it carefully, reading the words written there. "Where do you need to go? I'll help you get home." Maya's eyes softened as she looked up at him. This simple gesture made all the difference. He wasn't just offering help, he was making sure she felt seen, that her needs were understood. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet appreciation for how kind this stranger was. Maya thought for a moment before replying, knowing that this was the moment to tell him where she needed to go. She couldn't speak the words aloud, but she could write them. Using the pen, she wrote down the name of her street and the direction she thought she needed to go. The veteran nodded as he read it, then smiled gently. Without saying a word, he gestured for her to follow him. It was clear he had a plan. He knew where to take her. The trust between them had been established without a single spoken word, and that made all the difference. Maya felt a sense of hope she hadn't realized she needed. With this man by her side, she knew she would find her way home. As Maya followed the veteran, a sense of calm continued to settle over her. The quiet sounds of nature, rustling leaves, the occasional chirp of birds, and the soft breeze seemed to blend together, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Even though she still wasn't sure where she was exactly or how far they would have to walk, there was something about the veteran's steady pace and quiet confidence that made her feel safe. She no longer felt as lost as she had before. The veteran led the way, walking ahead of her, but always in a way that kept them connected. He moved with purpose, but he also seemed to be aware of how she was feeling. He made sure to walk at a pace that was comfortable for her, not too fast or too slow. His every movement seemed to reassure her that they were going in the right direction, even though Maya didn't have a clear sense of where that direction was. As they walked, Maya couldn't help but notice how calm he was. He didn't look hurried or anxious, even though she could tell that the park they had been in was not near the place she called home. There was no rush in his step. He was allowing the moment to unfold, showing patience and understanding. For the first time in a long time, Maya began to relax into the quiet companionship. There was no need for words to fill the silence. His presence alone spoke volumes. Maya's mind wandered as they walked. She thought about how different this experience was from anything she had known before. She was used to navigating the world on her own, relying on her own strength. and the tools she had learned to make her way through life. But right now, she didn't need to be strong on her own. The veteran was showing her that sometimes it was okay to lean on others, to accept help, and to trust. Her fingers twitched slightly, a natural reaction when she thought about her hands and how she used them to communicate. Sign language had always been a tool of independence for her, but in this moment, Maya realized that this walk wasn't about relying on her hands to speak. It was about the way people could connect without words. The veteran had shown her that even though they couldn't talk in the traditional way, they had already shared something important. Trust. Trust that, even in the midst of a moment of uncertainty, she wasn't alone. The walk continued, with the veteran leading and Maya following, feeling more at ease with each step. They passed by quiet streets and empty parks, and Maya began to recognize a few landmarks, though she wasn't sure exactly where they were. Still, it didn't matter as much anymore. The veteran's steady presence gave her a sense of peace. He wasn't just showing her the way. He was helping her find her inner calm, too. After what felt like an eternity but also like no time at all, the veteran stopped. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she looked around, trying to understand where they were. Her eyes searched for something familiar, something that would tell her they were close to home. And then she saw it, just a few blocks away, the street sign she recognized. The place where she had grown up, the place where her family was waiting for her. The veteran looked back at her and gave a small, knowing smile. He didn't say anything, but there was a clear understanding between them. He had helped her find her way home. He had done more than just guide her through the streets. He had guided her through a moment of fear and uncertainty, showing her that even in silence, there could be connection and kindness. Maya smiled back, feeling a mix of gratitude and relief wash over her. She had made it. She was almost home. Maya's heart pounded as she recognized the street sign just a few blocks away. Relief rushed through her like a wave. She was close to home, so close that she could almost hear the familiar sounds of her neighborhood. The sight of the street she knew so well filled her with warmth, and for the first time in hours, she felt truly safe. She turned toward the veteran, who stood beside her, watching her carefully. His face was calm, but his eyes held a quiet understanding. He had done exactly what he promised. He had helped her get home. No words had been spoken between them, yet he had guided her through the unfamiliar streets with nothing but patience and kindness. Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude building inside her. She wanted to tell him how much this meant to her. She wanted to express how thankful she was, how much it mattered that he had stopped, that he had noticed her distress when no one else did. But speaking was not her way. Instead, she lifted her hands and carefully signed the words, "Thank you." The veteran washed her hands and nodded slowly. Then, to her surprise, he signed back, "You're welcome." Maya's eyes widened. A small gasp of surprise escaped her lips before she smiled. He had understood her from the very beginning. He hadn't just recognized her SOS signal. He truly knew sign language. He had been speaking her language this whole time, even in silence. She felt a strange mixture of emotions: happiness, relief, curiosity. Who was this man? How did he know how to communicate with her? The veteran must have noticed her surprise because he pulled out his small notepad again and quickly wrote something down. He handed the paper to Maya, and she read it carefully. "I had a friend who was deaf. He taught me. I never forgot." Maya felt her throat tighten. This man wasn't just kind. He understood. He had taken the time to learn, to remember, to make sure someone like her was never left unheard. She looked up at him, her hands moving again, forming words with her fingers. "You helped me. You saw me." The veteran nodded, a gentle smile on his face. He didn't need to say anything more. They both knew what had just happened between them. It was more than just getting a lost girl home. It was about connection, about the power of noticing someone when they needed help the most. Maya turned toward her street, taking a step forward. But then she paused and looked back at the veteran one last time. She wanted to remember this moment, to hold on to the kindness he had shown her. Then, with a final wave, she took a deep breath and walked toward home, knowing she had met someone who had changed her life forever. As Maya reached her house, she felt a wave of emotions rush through her. The familiar sight of her home, her family's house, the place where she had spent so many happy moments, filled her with a deep sense of comfort. She turned one last time to look at the veteran, who had quietly stood by her side throughout the journey, offering his support and understanding. She wasn't sure what she had expected when she first made that SOS signal, but it certainly wasn't this. She had thought she was just a girl lost in the world, reaching out for help, unsure if anyone would notice. Yet here she was, standing in front of her house, with a deep sense of gratitude for this stranger who had seen her distress and reached out with nothing but kindness. The veteran, now standing a little farther away, gave her a small, reassuring nod. He didn't seem to need anything in return. His purpose was simply to help. And now his job was done. Maya's home was in sight, and it was time for her to step into the safety and warmth of her familiar world. She took a deep breath and signed one final message, her hands moving with slow care. "Thank you. You gave me more than help. You gave me hope." The veteran smiled at her words. He seemed to understand the depth of what she was saying. He raised his hand, not to wave goodbye, but to gesture something else, something that felt like a promise. It wasn't just the end of a journey. It felt like the beginning of something much more meaningful. He had been a quiet guide in her life for these past moments, and she would carry his kindness with her for a long time. Maya didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she'd ever see this man again. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that at the moment when she needed help, someone had seen her, understood her, and helped her find her way. That would stay with her forever. She smiled softly, a small, thankful smile, before turning back toward her front door. As she approached, her mother came into view, her face lighting up with joy when she saw Maya standing there. It had been a long day, but now it felt like everything was right again. Her family was waiting for her. They would be okay. Maya glanced one last time at the veteran, who had already begun to walk away. He had done his part, and now he was going back to his own life. The connection they had made, brief but powerful, would stay in her heart. As Maya entered her house and was greeted with love and warmth, she realized that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, in the quiet moments of kindness, in the gestures that require no words. People are seen. People are heard. And when you least expect it, you might find a stranger who will guide you back to the place you belong. The veteran had not just helped her find her way home. He had reminded her that kindness, understanding, and human connection can make all the difference in the world.